Good afternoon. Welcome to the December instalment of the AeroPM Learning Together program. Ordinarily, we would have someone doing the introductions, but I told the team I don't need any. I can do my own and I'm ready to go. AeroPM's Learning Together program is really about helping to upskill everyone in defence industry on a variety of topics using the expertise gathered from those on our team, and reinvesting it back into the broader defence community and the defence industry community specifically. Particularly useful if you don't have a great background in defence, then we've got 650 years worth of expertise on the team to share and download some of that stuff. So these run quite frequently, and our next one is being conducted by Tim Webster. That's on the 1st of February 2021, and he's discussing the planning and conduct of transition of support responsibilities. So you'll see plenty of advice coming out about that, and I'll remind you towards the end of this session today. So thanks so much for being here, for tuning in, and for choosing to join us here today and upskill. And I really hope I do that. There's a pretty small team. There's some in the room here as well. So feel free to add your questions as we go on the chat history, and we'll be able to address them as we go. And then we can open up to voice later on towards the end of the presentation. Today, I'm going to take the opportunity to talk about the challenge of introducing C4I into the Joint Force. And by way of background, my name is Peter Nugent. I'm here with AeroPM and have been for the last couple of years. In order, I'm a dad and a husband. I'm an ex-veteran, 20 years of service in Air Force, and a flight test engineer, distinguished graduate of the National Test Pilot School, electrical engineer by training, but would consider myself much more of an aerospace engineer these days. Today, we're probably going to stay for about 45 minutes on topic, there or thereabouts, and we'll allow for 15 minutes of questions. Naturally, there'll be no classified material or commercial sensitivities discussed. And we're going to talk a bit of an overview of some of the more routine challenges that we see when trying to integrate C4I into the Joint Force. And I'm going to use the electronic flight bags as a case study. If you don't know much about EFBs, that's okay. I'll provide a quick background on that. It won't be too difficult. The reason we've chosen electronic flight bags, aside from some personal time that I've spent personally dealing with EFBs, is because it's a pretty easy concept to understand, a pretty good C4I case study to choose, where you don't need to know how well things are being integrated. You can appreciate the risks as we go. So let's start. Air Force, in the last 20 years, very successful at turning over almost all major systems. The platforms there are virtually hard to think of, perhaps classic Hornet that hasn't changed over, although there's been other variants purchased naturally, and there's been major capability upgrades associated with that. Same Hercules. But in general, if you look at the inventory, it has been a substantial turnover of assets with the goal of pursuit of a 5th gen Air Force. And what does that mean? We're talking about low observability, vastly improved situational awareness. We always had this phrase about a decade ago, very popular, called network-centric warfare. And certainly that's still, according to Air Force, is the way to define 5th gen. It needs to be able to work in a network-centric combat environment. And then lastly, that all those systems have been optimized naturally to gain the advantage. And that's really the crux, the thing that we find really challenging. We can purchase low observability, and we can create this environment where we need to work together and share data as we go. But it's being able to optimize that is when we can truly reach 5th gen capability And you might say that we've had great difficulty or considerable difficulty in being able to achieve that. So I'm going to list 7 or 8 challenges that some of the reasons for why we haven't been able to achieve a well-optimised fighting force. This isn't just applicable to Air Force, naturally, these or the air domain specifically, but equally applies across maritime, land, space, and particularly joint by definition. So the first and foremost, C4I just plain isn't sexy, if we're honest. I mean, what you see there on the left, bottom left picture is a mobile mass processing unit in the Middle East, able to be rolled out very quickly. Incredibly important. All of the communications are being ported through this particular shipping container style solution. And then there's Loyal Wingman on the right there. And I know which one I would prefer to be a part of. You look and see what is being achieved with the unmanned combat aerial vehicle, and most would generally want to be a part of that particular project as opposed to delivering a shipping container full of servers. And that's understandable. And that's part of one of the challenges. First and foremost, it just doesn't put bum on seats. Secondly, at least as air power professionals, we're usually a lot more comfortable with how to project air power using the traditional assets based. You know, C-130s are for lift. Fast jets could be for strike and combat air support, etc. We're less comfortable and have less knowledge generally across the workforce, and not at any particular rank, but less comfortable with what that particular system is there, which is actually a C-band radar. Some of you may be aware, looking up and tracking objects in space. Sits up at Harold E. Holt. An incredibly important asset for one remote sensing unit there in Adelaide to be able to track where objects in space are going and when they're moving closer together, whether they should be or whether they shouldn't be moving closer together. Thirdly, and invariably with C4I, people start drawing diagrams a lot like the ones there on the right, because it's difficult it's a challenge to be able to explain the concept, what we're trying to achieve. So we have these sort of diagrams, and then they can become used quite liberally. So it's really easy to put a line between that object and that object and say, well, there's going to be a link there. It's far more difficult naturally to achieve that in practice, requires a scope of a bunch of engineering effort to be able to achieve that. So when it's difficult to sell your message, when it's not a bomb on a target, or it's not a tank that's being able to be slipped into the back of a C-27J or any battlefield airlifter, you've got to use diagrams to try and describe the effect that you need to achieve. And invariably that can lead itself to things looking great on paper and simple enough to conceptualize then, but difficulty in being able to implement that specifically. Equally, and until recently, there have been, I think you can make the argument that the workforce was not necessarily optimised to be able to support the C4I systems that were being used across the joint force. Air Force, for instance, within the last 6 to 12 months has made headway on being able to create new musterings of people and therefore new employment profiles and training plans associated with that to support network technicians, network engineers. largely that's still coming out of an extant AvTech and engineering workforce. But they've now, at least by creating that, the organisation has recognised the need for some unique skills associated with C4I systems generally, and can then start to recruit to that, train to that, and have career paths and growth associated with that. Up until recently, though, that simply didn't exist, and any elecTR could theoretically be posted into a C4I demanding role and not have necessarily the qualifications, training and experience to be able to excel in that role. The fifth point, and mitigated to a certain extent through the use of PI20 organisations, is that we have tended to concentrate our major systems, the JSFs and the Tigers and the Seahawks, through their respective divisions within CASG in terms of acquisition and sustainment. And anything that was in that middle ground that needed to be an enabler to ensure that fifth generation platform or systems was realised, there was a tendency to throw that into Joint Systems Division. And you can see that at the top level there with DepSec, a bunch of divisions that sit underneath that. And then I've expanded JSD out slightly underneath that. And there's some C4I aspects into a number of those, but specifically Joint C4 systems in purple, Land C4 in like a khaki yellow coloured there. And the ability of those particular organisations to be able to enable, to network, to create the bridges necessary across each of the other divisions is a real challenge. It's not impossible. And the PI20s, the Program Integration and Interoperability Organisations, are a great step and doing wonderful things to try and cover that particular risk. But it's really difficult to be able to know how so many other capabilities in the organisation operate and then be able to mesh those effectively. Leading into that, we talk about, at least in CASG, since First Principles Review, about wanting to understand the fundamental inputs to capability. In fact, CASG are responsible for looking after FIC management during the acquisition project before acceptance in a service. And those FIC elements that you see there listed are difficult to do when you're introducing one major system. If you are introducing P8, those elements, they're substantial, they're big bodies of work, and often complex, take long time to achieve, more, in some cases, more than a posting cycle. Now scale that up, because your C4I system that you purchased doesn't need to just be compatible with the P8, but equally, and we'll talk about electronic flight bag, that C4I system needs to be compatible with upwards of 20 separate aircraft types across Army, Navy and Air Force. So you need to, and the challenge here is to not just know your FIC elements for the particular major system, but equally that you know the FIC elements and how the fight is had by all the other parts of the organisation. That's a significant body of work, and it's one of the key challenges why C4I is difficult to be able to implement across the joint force. And of course, it doesn't stand still. The technology is always changing. It's always being upgraded. It's always obsolete. Or as soon as it's been delivered, it's then obsolete. Being facetious, I know, but the point being is that as complex as that framework is that I've just laid out, on top of that is a temporal consideration, which is that these things are being updated all the time. And as you'll see with electronic flight bag, in some cases, we defence don't have the gravitas to be able to control that market as we may wish. The last point, last challenge, I think, to reflect upon is that everyone needs C4I. Everyone needs it to be funded. No one necessarily has the funding within their major system to be able to support it. And no one lives this more so than JC2 SPO, MC2 SPO, SATCOM SPO. There needs to be a champion for the C4I elements because it sits as that meshed system that integrates across so many different platform types. There really needs to be a champion for that. And in recent times, Defence has recognised that, and particularly in Air Force, we are seeing, and I'll put some slides to talk to this in a moment, some really positive steps being taken forward within Air Combat Enabling Branch to be able to grip up so many of these C4I capabilities. Now, this slide I have unashamedly ripped from Emily Petrie, a wonderful defence contractor who was able to put this together as a part of a package going up to senior leaders to just try and articulate the challenges associated with C4I. So what you have here, I'm sure many of you will be well versed in this, is the capability program architecture with the 5 domains and then the multi-domain down the bottom there, and each of the capability programs against each of them. And when we take that one step further, I'll particularly let you take a look at across air, for instance. There are 6 programs there. And then we look at those 6 programs running down the middle of your page: Air ISRU, Air Mobility, Combat Air Support, Air Combat, Maritime Patrol and Response, and IAMD. And listed against them are each of the funding lines associated with those particular capability programs. Each of those capability programs have a sponsor, naturally, and there's very clear, distinct lines of command and control there. But there's one CAF funding line that doesn't reside against any of those, or for that matter, any of the multi-domain program elements underneath, and that is CAF 16. And CAF 16 funds the C4I systems. So as this basket case, or orphaned, let's call it, CAF funding line, it actually doesn't tie itself neatly yet to any of those 6 particular programs. And that's a problem, because that means that there's no necessarily one-star champion to be able to look after that, what's being delivered under CAF 16. And anything that doesn't neatly fit in, for instance, CAF 37 pilot training system or CAF 22 KC-30 weapon system, the default position is often, well, that's CAF 16, it's an enabler, and therefore it's got a microchip in it or a processor, therefore it must be C4I, and therefore sits in the CAF 16. So CAF 16 is this hodgepodge group of any number, something like 91 separate systems that CAF 16 is on the hook to fund, and yet it doesn't neatly reside within any of those particular capability programs. I said before that recently there's been some impetus to drag that up into the combat air support under DGACE. And so in the new year, the expectation will be that will have the C4I will get far more visibility or governance, let's say, under the Combat Air Support Program. And this is really borne out. What I described there came out really clearly in an independent assurance review against the CAF 16 generally. I'll give you a moment just to have a read. I thought this was interesting. This is about 6 to 7 months old now, and the review really didn't pull their punches. The key points to realise: it's uncoordinated, it's always evolving, and it covers Army, Navy, Air Force and joint operations. That was a fair indictment for a bunch of people that were trying really hard to get visibility of the programs that they were running, and very quickly turned it into a, well, this is our message that we need to go out to make sure that we are gripped up in the future, and use the independent assurance review to gain leverage with the relevant DGs, etc. So the independent assurance review talked about the fact that there is no point buying 5th gen assets if you're not going to invest in the part that makes them 5th gen. And we've found that difficult, in my view, based on the 8 or so aforementioned challenges. It's why it's a difficult beast, and one that we're still working on now. So I'm going to take a quick opportunity to talk about a case study to illustrate what I've just described there. ADF Electronic Flight Bags, of which some of you may be familiar. It's not necessarily a RAF picture down below, but it gives you the idea of the concept. Effectively, an Apple iPad strapped to the leg of aircrew. It was introduced as an Air Force minor in 2013, and it was brought about because many organisations, flying organisations, were seeing the value of this, not just in terms of digitising their publications. They could save themselves 20 kilos of pubs being lugged on the aircraft per person, but also the number of applications that can be generated for these particular devices to decrease their workload associated with flight. Effectively, Defence wanted to centralise and standardise so that we didn't have all 40 odd squadrons across Army, Navy and Air Force all running and purchasing their own devices. It is today currently used on every ADF asset with the exception of Growler and Super Hornet. I want to hazard a guess. I think they'd be the only 2 platforms remaining. In the end, it was delivered as a standalone unclassed system, which means it's good for the administration and the mission planning, the flight management stuff, not generally to be used tactically. A lot of value. Idea is to reduce overall pilot workload, make for safer, more effective, more efficient flying operations. A recent study into the system identified some traits that I think you'll find are fairly common with the challenges that I spoke about before. When it came in as an Air Force minor, there was a real lack of sustainment planning made available. How would these iPads be updated? Were they throw away, set and forget? Do they need maintenance? What do we do when battery life starts to degrade? Cyber protections associated with that. The things that have been identified once introduced into service showed that we didn't invest enough in thinking about the sustainment factors associated with this. If we were to compare resourcing, and if we were to compare, say, Qantas as an organisation that flies known routes routinely with very experienced crews, from effective field to effective field, they have a team of about 13 personnel that are managing this particular system. Within the ADF, where we have junior aircrew, captains on type that could be 23, 24 years of age, where we are not flying into prepared strips necessarily, where we have the potential to be shot in flight. This to fields that we've never been to before. It's not Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne. Then there was roughly about anywhere between 2 to 4 full-time establishment to support, to acquire, to maintain this particular system. Equally, unlike the airline industry, where it's RPT, which passenger transportation between cities, our platforms naturally do a diverse range of roles, from strike, combat air support, airlift, maritime patrol, maritime support, interdiction, etc. And these pose unique design challenges for what this system needs to be able to achieve. So it's not a one-size-fits-all opportunity for C4I. And that's probably a challenge I didn't tease out before, is that each of our users, end users, may actually need out of necessity, there you go. They have a requirement to operate that bit of kit differently, not because they would like to, or they think they've found a better way to do it, but usually out of the necessities of environment, the opponent, that sort of stuff, the capabilities of the major system itself. And that means we need to design in the requirements for our C4I system early on and understand what those user needs are, and then be able to tailor the system accordingly. In the rollout of this, in the pace of the rollout of this, there's been a limited appreciation for how, say, a Romeo pilot might use this bit of kit, as opposed to a VIP transport pilot would use it very differently. Some elements can be the same and are the same, but there are different requirements naturally. I should say that those requirements don't necessarily mean different apps available in the device. It might mean how ruggedized the particular device is, the sheer size of it. An iPad mini for a rotary pilot that's using a collector and cyclic, as opposed to an airline, more air mobility guy who might actually not wear it on their knee at all, but instead put it up on the windshield into a mount, so that they've got their situational up there and can have their head and eyes looking out. Equally, the ruggedization of those devices, some of them are going to need to work in particularly hot environments, and Apple iPads tend not to like that. But some are just going to be in air-conditioned comfort the whole time. Some need to be able to be taken into sensitive areas. They're not sensitive themselves, but those devices might need to be dragged into skiffs and the like to be able to use. And so we need to tailor and think about the requirements there. Other findings, the logistics support arrangement was fairly disjointed. In terms of acquisition, you would go from the end user through to the capability manager, through to the applicable SPO, across to CIOG, who are under FinMan 2 responsible for all purchasing of ICT equipment, who then have a contract with a service provider, who then sub to someone else to actually go and purchase the kit. 6 or 7 sets of hands before to get the order in and naturally for the device to come back. The latest defence purchase for EFBs was around 1,200 devices, which during a time of COVID, when demand for devices is large anyway, and noting that a major production facility for Apple iPads is in Wuhan, meant that, you know, being able to satisfy 1,200 items was not necessarily easy. And let me talk momentarily about our ability to influence the commercial environment for this particular C4I system. I said 1,200 devices, but that is but a drop in the ocean when we talk about the needs of the US military. And the US military has zero, in our discussions with them, zero ability to influence Apple's design or any of the choices that they make, just because there's, I don't know, another billion customers around the world that are more important to them. So when Apple chooses to change the device from 9.7 inch to 10.2 inch, then we have no ability, and frees the ability to purchase any more 9.7 inch devices, so that everyone is dragged across to the 10.2 inch device. What sounds quite simple is actually quite a significant amount of change for SPOs and engineering staff around the organisation if they've got their mounts set up to be able to take the Apple product that has existed as a 9.7 inch device for the last 6 or 7 years. Some of these C4I systems that we are purchasing are simply, we don't have the volume, the gravitas in the market to influence. And we can look to purchase bespoke systems, and then that comes with a number of disadvantages associated with that naturally. But most of the time, we are, and can be at the, most of the time it's probably unfair. Sometimes we just don't have the pull to be able to shape the market the way we might like. Also means we tend to need to be reactive. So aside from not being able to influence, equally when changes are made, particularly with a company like Apple, that you tend to find out at the same time the rest of the world finds out through some global event shared online. And then you can try and react and make all the adjustments you can for your supply chain sustainment factors accordingly. Finally, the report identified that there was, at the time, no collective training. I understand that that's changed somewhat, but in terms of, you know, one of those key FIC elements being collective training, that remained outstanding. That we handed over iPads. We assumed everyone would be able to work an iPad, and more than often they obviously could. We're talking about, you know, young professionals operating significantly expensive aircraft, but there are idiosyncrasies associated with apps that can that require training to be provided. And so in recent times, there's been a real push to get the training aspects associated with this particular C4I system remediated. So the current work that's going on is a significant body of work being completed and achieved by the Air Warfare Centre as a CCMO and JC2SPO, the relevant CAS-G element, in being able to execute a remediation plan that effectively addresses all of those FIC elements. They're paddling upstream there naturally because of those challenges that I spoke to at the start of this presentation. They're all very difficult challenges to be able to retire. But through significant investment in resources, there's a real impetus to being able to retire some of those risks associated with the current use of electronic flight bag. They're not all, they're mostly capability risks and being treated and captured and reported upon, etc. there is some aviation safety risks as well, which are being routinely investigated by the team, and that work is ongoing as well. The end goal being a safe, effective and efficient airborne environment. The move to this electronic flight bag, it has been wonderful at being able to reduce the amount of paper that we've taken on board, but they're so much more powerful than that, and our ability to operate them to extract all of that value and still keep crews safe and effective and efficient is a ongoing working process, and something that we'll need to continue to work on for some time. All right, that's about the 40-minute mark. I'll just check. I'll take a drink of water because I'm parched, and I'll have a look at the chat history, and if there's any questions, you'll be able to have a chat soon, or I'll address them as we go. Let's start with the main themes, the main challenges to C4I, effective C4I implementation, integration into the joint force. Does anyone want to take a swing at either additional challenges that haven't been picked up there, or does anyone take issue with some of the challenges as raised?
Peter, it's Emily here. Thanks for your interesting presentation and discussion. I expect that there's also an element of, I guess, disagreement or lack of agreement is probably a better way of saying it, between the capability managers on importance and priorities of C4I elements that span across the joint force. Is that something that you've experienced, or, in your experience, has it been for everyone sort of is in agreement as to the priority and importance of the C4I aspects you've worked on?
I think capability managers are understandably focused on being able to extract the traditional capabilities out of some of these systems. And it's perhaps more the purview of Joint Force Authority, increasingly so with some of the work we've seen out of VCDF Group, where they are very much interested in being able to validate, verify some of those joint effects of which C4I is integral to being able to enable. So perhaps not so much from the capability manager. I think their priorities can tend to want to be around ensuring that their particular major system is up to the task, has been introduced, as training crews and all of those sorts of things. And it's really the impetus for this is coming out of Joint Force Authority. All right. Any general comments about the challenges then, if there's no additional ones?
Hey Pete, Paul Barnes here.
Hello Barnesy, how are you?
I'm good, mate. I wouldn't have missed his presentation for the world. So I did get caught into last minute kid drop-offs. So I was only listening and I didn't see Emily's great slide. So I'll have to look through the slide deck later. The main reason I wanted to join on today's call is because obviously our company, is very focused in the land domain. And so it was great to hear from the air perspective. I'm going to take away, your line about fifth generation investment, because that is absolutely something the Army's struggling with at the moment. You know, they're buying really expensive armoured vehicles and those kind of investments, but probably not, you know, investing in the back end as well. So that was my main observation today, mate. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. What about you, Rex? Did you say anything that that you would focus on? Does any of the challenges we're seeing or talked about there, does it end up becoming an aviation safety risk or down track? I don't think Rex is with us. So you're on mute still, Rex. Well, if there's no other comments, I can't see any going in there. We might leave it there. Last chance for input. Oh, Rex, you're there. Did you want to add anything? All right, okay. Not a problem, understood. All right then, well, thanks very much for participating today or for listening in. Please, if you've got anything you'd like to discuss privately, you're always welcome to do so. You'll find me on LinkedIn or peter.nugent@aeropm.net. These Learning Together programs are put on different topics each time. We run a series of them through the year. As I said, the next one is on 1st February 2021. Planning and conduct of transition of support responsibilities. That's going to be provided by Tim Webster. If you've got topics you'd prefer or like us to discuss, then by all means, again, you can send them my way and we'll be able to cover them off. Okay, I hope you have a great day. Thanks so much for your participation and have a lovely Christmas. Thanks, bye.